Hello everybody and welcome to episode 7 of the Queer Disrupt podcast. My name's Hannah Ayres and I am the co-convener of Queer Disrupt. This episode has Catriona Wilson and Billy Huntington take a close look at Jaremi Carey's Animal Crossing Harry Potter themed balls, and they offer an in-depth exploration into Animal Crossing, drag, Harry Potter, RuPaul's Drag Race, gender expression, and the ballroom scene of the late 20th century. This episode, titled On the Ball, Fandoms and Fantasy, is split into 2 parts, with this being the second part. And I really hope you enjoy.
So coming back to what we were talking about earlier with kind of comparing the digital and the analog space, I thought we could kind of tie in the elements that we've had earlier and just add the last, or maybe
pull
the second
these tangents together somehow.
Before we can pull the tangents together, let's come back to the last bit. So we've kind of covered, Animal Crossing, we've got Potter, and then we've got drag a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's do the ball. So, of course, as I'm sure you know, the ball scene is a kind of late 20th century development of queer American culture. Based in New York City, it was a kind of scene in which houses of queer people who were formed through queer people kind of finding their own families, often after their families kicked them out, competing in these sort of pageants. These were particularly people who were people of colour or members of other marginalised groups. And actually, there were a lot of trans people involved in this movement. And they would compete in these pageants where there would be different categories such as executive realness or face or housewife. And they would wear an outfit and walk. So they would walk by strutting around beautifully around the ballroom where these parties were held, so often to music, performing in the character of the category. So if it were executive realness, they might wear a business suit and sort of pretend to take a phone call and say, "You're fired, I own 51% of this company," etc. And then they would be judged by a panel of judges who would have scorecards. You'd get scores out of 10. What you were judged on was a kind of range of things. It was your beauty, your style, your kind of fashion knowledge and things like that, the quality of your costume, and people took it very seriously. There was a lot of shoplifting going on.
They called it mopping.
They did indeed, yes. They would be judged on their kind of charisma and their mien and their presentation. And then there was this word that was used a lot and is still used in the gay community. They talk about their realness. And I think, that's a difficult one. We have mopping, which is just shoplifting, but then realness, I think, is a difficult word to translate.
Yeah, it encompasses a lot of different ideas, I think. Nowadays, when I hear it, I think mostly people would know it from, just an offhand way of being like, "Oh, you're giving me Lady Gaga realness," which would just mean you look like Lady Gaga. But I think there was a lot more to it originally, which was about sort of judging people on a very gender conforming patriarchal scale.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because I think the word was doing a lot of kind of progressive and regressive work at the same time. Yeah,
it was like giving with one hand and taking with the other.
Because on the one hand, to use the word realness to judge a competition done in the 80s of working class, queer, gender non-conforming people of colour dressed as businessmen was doubly interesting as a rejection not just of kind of heteronormativity and the oppression of minority groups, but also against capitalism in this quite interesting way. To call it real, to say that it was effective at realness, if you will, was not just to say that they were kind of like businessmen, it was to say they were businessmen. Yeah. Not to get too Derrida about this, but performing an identity is embodying an identity. And I think that's really interesting. But on the other hand, it was used to sort of ridicule those who were felt to fail at realness and to reinforce more regressive or conservative ideas about what a woman should look like.
Yeah.
And it reinforced the high value of expensive designer clothes and the low value of cheap ones.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because originally a lot of it was stolen, but I think it has sort of led to this culture now where if a drag queen can afford, a pricey thing, that's seen as better, the more expensive a gown might be, when originally the idea was that, well, not the idea, but it was disruptive in that they weren't paying for it.
Whereas now when they do pay for it, we have this problem that, drag queens who have access to money from one direction or another do have a privilege that isn't always explicit explicitly acknowledged on shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, or worse, is codedly acknowledged in a way that's derogatory to queens who are less privileged. I think there's recently been a quite interesting conversation about the way that the word crafty has been weaponized against queens of colour. The word crafty, when derogatory, you know, it's a critique. Like, why should craft be bad?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you can
to say, how dare you homemaking?
Be impressive, not, you know, look down upon. Obviously, if you have the money, it's a lot easier to just go out and buy something. You make it by hand yourself, when you're also expected to lip sync and act and do comedy and everything else. I think so much of it as well is about like access, and how, you know, in the 70s, these people didn't have access to these expensive clothes. Trans people weren't granted a lot of access to gender conformity. And then now, for some of them, it may be easier to get those things. But does that mean that we should still laud them and shame people who don't have the access to those things anymore?
Well, hopefully no. Hopefully we shouldn't shame people.
I didn't mean that as a
no.
question.
I know.
I got lost in my own
No,
sentence
Billy.
then.
People who... No, if you don't have Dolce, get out. No, obviously are not pro-shaming people who don't have desire.
But I mean, it's like an understandable desire to have, I think, if you're impoverished, to want these things. But is that the same as saying that's okay? Isn't necessarily saying that we should celebrate the people who do have it.
I see what you mean. Yeah, there's a distinction between wanting expensive things and admiring people just for having them. Yeah. Okay, you're making that distinction, and I think it's an important one. And the ball scene where they really strongly made that distinction. One thing I think doesn't always get brought up, but is I think important, is that people involved in the ball scene, like some had money and some didn't, and often they had money from more or less legitimate sources. The people who participate in the ball scene were born into a very diverse range of class backgrounds, with a diverse range of expectations and accesses, and in general they hit a point at which their queerness was outed, or they outed themselves as queer, and they were rejected by their original families and communities and found this new one. What I mean to say is that I think we all know it's an interesting community because it was a sort of self-made one. It was one that people weren't born into. It was one that they kind of joined upon being rejected by their original one. And so you had people coming from a range of sort of class and privilege backgrounds into this. Many of them ended up being homeless at points, but some of them were born into very middle class families, you know, particularly white members were born into wealth and privilege and things like that, and then kind of lost it when they became queer. And so the relationship between members of the ball community and kind of capitalism and luxury is a complicated one, and one that varied quite a lot, because you had people who were sort of, particularly a lot of the people who were born working class, or who kind of migrant families and things like that, there was never the possibility that they would have access to that, and they would never look like an executive. But there are some who were born into that and kind of did. Yeah. It's not to say that they chose to be ousted from their original community, because of course nobody chooses to be queer, but like there's a difference in your relationship if you have once had it. Yeah, right?
It seemed that at one point your life path would sort of like lead towards that then, if it was never even allowed to you, and it was never going to be the way you saw it.
And so I think the rejection of capitalist values and the kind of simultaneous coveting and rejection of both capitalism and luxury by the ballroom scene, it's complicated and it's diverse, and the ball scene gets a lot of flack now for being problematic, and one direction is that people see it as read it as kind of capitalist and overly celebrating luxury, and I think a way that kind of flattens the complicated relationship that the participants had with capitalism and luxury. And I think there's a point you made about mopping wasn't just a means to an end, it was a political act. It was the rejection felt by the community was a mutual one. You know, they mopped as a protest. They didn't just wear luxury garments, they ruined them. First through their kind of creative and wonderful customizations.
Yeah, well, even wearing them to a certain extent is a protest, when these places, a lot of fashion places will rather destroy their clothes than let poor people wear them, because that will lower the value. And I'm sure back then that included people of colour and queer people as well. So to even wear something that was never intended for you is a form of protest.
Exactly, yeah. And I think there's that, and then also there's this, by wearing them, they damage them.
Yeah.
Because you can't sell it if it's sweaty or stained.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? So I think there's something quite interesting there about the material relationship between the participants, the ball participants, the competitors, and their garments and their bodies. I think the materiality of the garment was so important. It was the fact of the physical occupation of the items and the damage to them, I think, is so interesting. And of course, that's not there in the Animal Crossing balls. But also, there is this conflict that we were talking about earlier about queer bodies and how you're limited by your body, and contestants were limited, and you see this in media around the balls. It's covered in Pose, it's covered in Paris is Burning. You were partially judged on the outfit that you created, but you were also partially judged on the body that you could only alter so much.
Yeah,
and which is difficult to alter. And members of the community were humiliated sometimes for their shape, or they're told that they do not look enough like a woman and things like that. And yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about an Animal Crossing ball, I would guess, having never played it, is that the body is so neutralized.
Yeah, then you can project anything onto it. And you, when you asked me earlier about how is it queered by the fandom, I think this is probably actually a really prominent way where it was never intended to have drag shows, but the fact that you can change the outfit and you can do that in any way you can sort of imagine within certain boundaries of, only so many clothes and there's a limited amount of different hairstyles, but that is drag in a way.
Could it be argued that it's no longer transgressive if the physical body doesn't limit the appearance? Because while many people consider the character they play in Animal Crossing to be an extension of themselves or an avatar, it isn't quite you in the same way as your physical body in a lot of people's view.
I suppose, but then in another way it's sort of like a very levelling way of doing drag where you're all, starting with the same thing and it's just purely your creativity and how you put these outfits together and the story you create with that, which is being judged rather than your body and how that fits to certain ideals and how well you deal with the problem, quote unquote, of your body.
What I'm saying is it could be queer without being transgressive.
Yeah.
And if without the limitation or of either the physical body or other people's expectations for that body, is it still transgressive?
I think that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer. That's a good point.
What is being transgressed? When one has a queer Animal Crossing character, what is being transgressed?
Well, I guess nothing, unlike the ballroom scene, nothing is being physically transgressed, but you could still argue, I think, that cultural norms are being transgressed and gender identities are being transgressed, if you can transgress a gender identity.
No, I think you're right.
A gender norm, maybe, is what I mean. Ideas in people's heads are being transgressed more than anything physically.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as you say it, there's something wonderfully levelling about the shared sort of, is it ungendered or unisex? How would you describe the Animal Crossing body, the triangular blob that is the character? Is it gendered or is it genderless? Is it ungendered?
Yeah, maybe it's desexed in a way. I guess it's up to each person how they see it.
Fair, okay. I like that.
I'm not going to make a ruling on.
Wait, should we call Nintendo now? Get an official statement? No. Okay, we've got the Animal Crossing, we've got the Potter, we've got the dragon, we've got the ball covered, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the last element is like let's put this together to get like what is actually happening and where. So Jaremi Carey is advertising with posts on Instagram and things this Potter ball and sort of explains the basics on that advert, and then it's hosted, and correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology here.
I'll correct you if you say anything wrong.
It's being viewed on Twitch, right?
Yes.
Which I actually do know some stuff about. So I watch Twitch.
Okay, I'm not an expert on Twitch. I just watched that one Crystal Dems thing. That was the first time I've ever used Twitch.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay, yeah. I think it's interesting how I think in lockdown Twitch has grown a new audience.
Yes.
And in particular its queer audience. It makes so much sense to put drag on it, I think. And it's so suited for it. But I think Jaremi Carey was really on the ball with this one. On the ball. Yeah, so it's kind of viewed on Twitch. He advertises on Instagram in advance and Facebook and all these other platforms. And then on the day, and it's a live broadcast of, one is Jaremi Carey being filmed directly. They, interestingly, did not wear, in their physical body, they did not drag that body, I believe, or do not always drag the body for the broadcasts. They kind of dress in their own self-presentation, if that makes sense, which I think is interesting. I don't want to say they're not dressed up because, you know, I think we're always dressed up.
Yeah.
You know, even in your pajamas, you should be dressed up.
Yeah, that's still a choice.
It's still a choice, you know, and that's what I'm saying. And, you know, there's a conscious choice of an outfit to present in, which I think is a good one, but it's not a kind of drag look. And then there's a second broadcast, and the screen of their controller, which is what they're watching as they play, which is their Animal Crossing, presumably on Switch.
Nintendo Switch, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I was like, Switch and Twitch.
And
it's very
Twitch.
confusing. And so the Twitch broadcast is on large screen, the Switch screen, and then you see in a smaller one, Jaremi Carey's being filmed, and it's a live broadcast of both, and so you watch them play. And then there's a chat feature, and people can kind of chat in the comments, and Jaremi Carey can read these live and kind of engage with people and say, ha, very funny, etc. How the ball works is they start broadcasting, give it about half an hour, and they have a live raffle where people can enter up to 10 times, and I believe it costs bells to enter, which is where I have my first question, which is, what are bells?
So bells are just the currency used in any Animal Crossing game, in any island. That's what you use to purchase the things you need. That's what you earn when you sell things.
Okay, and how do you get bells?
Well, there's a lot of ways you can get bells. I think it's mainly through selling things to Tom Nook, who's the number one capitalist of every village and island in Animal Crossing. In the latest game, you can make things, you get the raw materials of wood, and you can make furniture, you can sell it, you can pick fruit and sell it, you can fish and sell the fish, you can collect insects and sell the insects, you can dig up fossils and sell the fossils, and then you can use that money to buy things that you want for your island, to add an extension onto your house, to make new things for the island, and to move stuff around, anything you want to do.
I see, okay, and so on a practical level, so you get bells from gameplay.
Yes.
The more hours you put into the game,
yeah,
and the better
if you're doing
you
it
are
right,
at it.
yeah.
I'm presuming your goal is to get bells, because it's quite an open goal.
Yeah.
Game. You get bells. Can you buy bells? Is there an exchange rate, GBP?
I wouldn't be surprised if there was, because there's a thing called, I'm sure there's a lot of online platforms, but there's one that I've used called Nookazon. That's sort of like a online exchange where you can meet up with people online or on your island to then exchange things. And I've done that. I've purchased a villager before.
Using British money?
No,
okay.
Obviously no.
With bells?
With bells.
Okay.
But with that said, I think because that sort of interaction with the real internet, with just the online gameplay of Animal Crossing, I'm sure that people have paid money for bells.
Okay.
Although there's not an official way of doing that through Nintendo.
I see. So Nintendo don't sell bells.
No.
She sells seashells on sale. Right, so Nintendo don't sell bells to users directly, but there is inevitably some level of like users customizing. I'm not gonna lie here, I'm a lawyer's daughter, right? I want to know where the money is.
Yeah.
And what I do know with Twitch, I understand the monetizing of Twitch, and it's free to watch the balls, and you can watch live for free. I think it's prefaced with an advert, so Jaremi Carey earns money from viewers watching via the ad company, but that you don't have to pay to watch. In order to participate as a contestant, there's a first barrier, like financial barrier here, where you're not paying for Jaremi Carey, but you have to own a Switch and own the game, which is not free, or I would have it. There's a kind of interesting little, actually quite material barrier to access there. A different one to the body, but one there. Once you have the game, it's then free to enter the raffle because you're just spending bells.
Okay, is it?
I'm asking this.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know specifically the structure of how Jaremi does it. But if it's
if it's just bells,
it is just bells, then that's, you know, it doesn't have a real financial value, but obviously will represent hours of your time.
Okay.
And how much you've played and what level you are.
And as that lawyer parent likes to say, time is money.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a bit here, but you know, whatever. This is pretty nice. So people enter the raffle and then contestants are chosen. And okay, this is the bit you're going to have to explain to me. So Jaremi Carey has an island, which is their sort of base.
Yeah.
It belongs to Jaremi. It's associated with their specific game.
Yeah.
And Jaremi can invite people onto that island.
Yes.
Who are also players.
Yes.
So the winners of the raffle, who are the contestants, they're playing at home on their own Switch.
Yeah.
And they are sent an invite electronically to Jaremi Carey's island.
Yes, I think it's in the form of a code, which then allows you access to that island.
I was wondering, I kind of imagining like a primary school Tamagotchis and you sort of broadcast it people.
Yeah, I think it's evolved a bit since then, so you'll get a code. Every island has a little local airport, and you go to that and then you give them the code.
Oh, that's so...
And then you can fly to that island.
Oh, so it's like integrated into the gameplay.
Yes, yeah.
That sounds way less janky than I was imagining.
Yeah.
Okay, so you fly to Jaremi's island. I assume that's pretty instant.
Yes.
And Jaremi can boot people off if they want, right?
I think there are ways of doing that, yeah. I think you can go to the airport and I think he complains and gets them to leave, or he could just turn his switch off.
I see.
If things were going really badly.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so you get this exclusive invite onto Jaremi's island. Can I ask, are there benefits to the contestants of just being on the island? Like, would they get anything out of this that you can think of instinctively? Like, I guess my first question is this like a kind of long-term invite? Can you change the code, or do they just have access forever?
No, they don't have access forever. I can't remember the exact rules of it, but he has to open his airport to let people in. So he has to manually do that, and he can then close it. And I think the code is probably a one-time code, although I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Okay, so got pals with Jaremi, and so your person then moves on. Can you still like access your wardrobe and stuff once you're on somebody else's island? Do you have to like pack a virtual bag?
I think you do have to pack a bag.
Oh, really?
And then you get a certain amount of like inventory of like what you need. But there's not a lot of stuff that you would need to travel to someone's island, apart from if you were doing this ball, when obviously I assume they need to take their outfits and things in their bag. Although outfits are assigned to magic wands. If you have advanced enough to be able to create these wands, which have a whole outfit in this wand. Well, that's sort of like getting lost in the source of the gameplay.
No. This is interesting. Okay, so you can have, I guess like a wand is like, you use a wand to kind of put a whole outfit together into one clump.
Yeah, and then you just wave that wand, which is I think how they do it at the Animal Crossing drag shows, and then they completely change the outfit. That's the Animal Crossing equivalent of like an outfit reveal.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that for them. This is great. Okay, so coming back. Okay, so I think there's usually about 7 contestants or so, and if we look at the adverts, a 5 million bell prize for first place, 3 million for silver, and bronze gets 1 million. Is that a lot of bells?
That's a fair few bells, yeah. I think that's more than I've ever had, but probably altogether, if I'd never spent any bells, I think that's enough to get you like all your house extensions, which is the most expensive thing in the game.
Oh my god, that sounds like a lot of money.
But then I think, there's a exchange rate for things like different villagers who are most sought after. There's about like 10 villagers who are the most expensive villagers to get on Nookers on, because they've been like, they're the most popular ones online, and they've been like memed loads, and they're like the most celebrated. I would say they go for like a million bells. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a lot of money to play with.
Okay, I see. Okay, so that's a big prize.
Yeah, that's
and that will be
prize.
From Jaremi. Carey will have acquired this money through sheer hard work of playing.
Yeah, yeah, that's an achievable amount for a dedicated Animal Crossing. Like, you won't have to do like crazy things to get that amount of money.
Okay, but that's okay. There's 4 looks each specified. We have the Hogwarts student inspired, professor inspired, represent your house.
Okay.
And then the 4th one is HP couture, and then in sort of not super accessible small font, it says, I'm having to lean in here, using the DIY app add-on for the Nook phone, look must be created by you. I've read that in an odd order because I genuinely don't know which words are next to which. Can you read that again?
I'll try and read that. Using the DIY app add-on for the Nook phone, look must be created by you. So what I think he's trying to say, I don't think that was a very clear way of saying it. So there's outfits which you can buy, there's a clothing shop, and you sort of just like accrue in different ways, other villagers give them to you, like a big dress or whatever. But then there's outfits which you can personally design, obviously have limitations, so you can't do all the crazy things. Like the ones you could be given could be like an astronaut helmet, an astronaut thing, and those different shapes. Whereas you can tailor ones which, it could be t-shirt shaped or dress shaped, but you design the pattern. And you get given sort of like a square of a certain amount of pixels to sort of design. And in this, you can see that Harry Potter emblem.
I was going to ask you about this, because we have a tiny Animal Crossing avatar, Jaremi Carey, who looks absolutely adorable, I want to say. Like, so sweet. And it's, sorry, that I don't mean to be like some mum here, but looking very cute. We have Jaremi Carey with their sort of mop of blue hair, which I think they did have at the time.
That looks very Jaremi Carey.
And then they have a t-shirt with what looks like a Hogwarts logo on it. And I was wondering about that.
So if you look at this villager, you can see that it's quite a low res emblem, and that's because it's designed in the DIY app on the Nook phone. Whereas if you look at maybe their hairstyle or the jeans or the shoes, those aren't designed, those are given to you.
I see, okay.
So that's sort of like a challenge of using your creativity. They'll have designed a square and drawn the best Harry Potter emblem they could with the limitations, which I think is quite fun.
It looks great, I have to say. Okay, fair play to them.
So people use it to say words, different slogans. You could do like a zebra print or just anything that hasn't been imagined by the designers.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I get it now. And I suppose actually, because we were talking earlier about options to queer the game, I suppose this is a great one, right?
Yeah, so it's the same way that earlier I mentioned you can design your own like rainbow flag for the island. You can use these designs on anything. You can make a whole rainbow outfit, or just, you know, people use it to like intersect with the different fandoms as well. Anything that you can imagine within I think it's like a 20 by 20 pixel square.
Is it censored in any way? Do you know? Like, so if you wrote like a swear word or something,
no, you can do a swear word. That's the fun of it. Being a children's game, I think there are certain allowances for a child or a child's parents not wanting to see that. For example, you know, you might design something and give it to your villager, and then your villager might move to another island, and that other island might be a real person's actual game if they've traded that person with you or persuaded that villager to move to their island from your island. And then they'll still have that design t-shirt. There's a naughty word on it. You know, I think there is a way you can go to Isabel, who's a little dog who works for Tom Nook, the head capitalist of the island, and you can complain to her. I've never done this, so I think part of this is speculation. I think there is an opportunity to complain about a certain villager and be like, they've got a rude word on their t-shirt, can you change that? And they'll set it back to default. Or I think there is like an online way of looking at different designs, and I'm sure that those get censored in a certain way.
I see. So theoretically, could you sort of spread the gay agenda by
100%,
covering villagers in gay flags and things like that? Okay.
And, you know, for example, sometimes a villager will come up to you and they each have a catchphrase, which is just can be like a random word that they say like every other sentence. And sometimes they're like, oh, I'm really bored of mine, can you come up with a new one? And then so I've done things like gay rights and stuff like that.
Oh, fantastic.
So they'll be like, blah, 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 can you find me this fish? Gay rights. Or I'm feeling down today. Gay rights.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Which is great for like different fun screenshots and memes.
I see. That's amazing. But have you ever lost an islander that you've given a catchphrase to?
No, because I don't think I've ever sold an islander. So I think islanders can leave your game, and I think then they don't go anywhere. But if someone comes and gets given your islander, then they would, and then I'll be spreading the gay agenda truly.
I see. This is all we want to do in life. As we were saying, so we have designed teacher, and it's interesting that there's a very short rule list here, and there's no sort of asterisk terms and conditions. Within this short rule list that we have now read out, Jaremi has specified that there has to be at least one kind of couture, self-drawn image, which I think is really interesting.
I think it's sort of similar to if you watch the recent seasons of Drag Race, when they'll have a ball, they'll be like, usually they'll specify 3 looks, maybe 4, and like the first 2 will be ones that they've heard about in advance. And will have had the opportunity to get designers to do it for them or put them together. And then the last one, they'll be like, here's a load of fabric, or like, here's a bunch of polystyrene, old cardboard, whatever, recycling materials. You need to make something together. So that's what this last HP Couture is giving me. That's sort of like the fun limitations one, where it's like a real test of your design skills rather than putting together existing outfits.
I see. Okay, interesting. But then again, of course, I do think that kind of curation is a skill.
Yes.
I've got to pray to God it is.
Yeah, it's just different sort of skills. And also I'm sure that the first 2 categories will include some sort of hand-designed outfits as well, but they just wouldn't have to, and I guess the last one has to, and it's purely that.
We were talking earlier about how, you know, you can buy islanders with human money, and by buying it unofficially by buying a trade. Could you commission with human GBP money? Could you commission?
Oh, I'm sure you could, because these designs are very shareable and they get given their own code as well. You could put that online and be like, I've just done this Harry Potter emblem, and maybe that's how they've got it, and then you just put the code in, and then you can get that design. And I'm sure someone could be like, I will give you the code if you give me either a certain amount of bells or real money.
Okay, but it's not like a big established culture.
Not that I know of. Certainly I think maybe purchasing it with bells, I wouldn't be surprised. I've not done that, but I've not heard of someone paying someone specifically to create a specific design for them.
I see. Okay, interesting. No, genuinely, I like.
But I've heard of rich people doing a lot of things. So.
True. God damn. That makes it quite different to the balls, and you know, we were saying one of the issues is this whole like inequality and the access barrier of the physical, like or the monetary expense.
Yes. Although, you know, like you said, there is still the access barrier of owning a Switch, and even within that, you know, gameplay hours is you see people can really rock them up, and like how much can you do that if you're like working 2 jobs or whatever? Different people have different lifestyles, and money makes that easier. And also probably there are rich people out there who are just paying people to get them the things they want and make the game really easy.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, of course, like I think, yeah, it's not devoid of accessibility issues, even though it massively improves on them. You know, I think it's really wonderful how, like, to think of also about like the kind of the physical access barriers of the ballroom scene. It was not the most, like, you know, disability friendly in certain ways, and you know, and club nights, queer spaces now are often not disability friendly, and you know, even if they're kind of wheelchair friendly, it's often the less obvious ways for space to be disability friendly that they're not. You know, they often have epilepsy and similar triggering machines, but also they're not always accessible for people who are neuroatypical or who can't drink. This is a huge problem, I think.
It's such, if you don't drink alcohol, you know, you have to live in the right place. And I think, you know, if you're living in the middle of the countryside, there's not going to be like a great gay club necessarily. And I think this is something that you could do not only if you live in rural areas, but you could live in any city in the world where maybe it would not even be legal to go out to these things. So I think that's great as well.
Exactly, yeah, because of course the ball, Jaremi, Carey started doing these balls in lockdown when I think everybody was suddenly experiencing this change in what counts as their space. Suddenly our space ended at the window, or the end of the garden if you were so lucky as to have one. What a dream. I was very lucky to, as a queer person, to be locked down with another queer person, and I know you were as well. And I think that was important to me, and you know, I got to engage in queer media, whereas I have spoken to others who were locked down in exclusively straight households, and of course with a lot of younger people living in smaller spaces, a lot were down to their parents, because being older and more established, they had better and bigger houses and more permanent housing spaces. But then that means going back into that more heterosexual, heteronormative,
maybe having to like downplay certain aspects of your identity.
Exactly. And you know, and that comes in so many ways, just the fact that people, like, you know, default to certain pronouns when they talk about
dead names and things like that, or ways they wouldn't usually dress even.
I mean, I was just today in the car with a straight man friend of mine who is a lovely guy, super great in many ways, and I want to be clear, this is not critique of him, but we were playing this game of like judging drivers, and like before we could see the driver, he'd always assumed their gender, and it was in a very like kind of cliche way, and you could see the cliches, like he used he for almost every driver except for one, and it was the Fiat 500. You know what I'm saying? You know? And there's, you know, he was mostly right. Being away from even just that kind of subtle stuff, which I don't even want to call it a microaggression. It wasn't aggressive, but like being...
It's just different when you're hanging out with straight people than you're hanging out with people that you have this thing in common with.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't hurting anybody, and it's not microaggression, but it's different to that. But it's that subtle perpetuation of heteronormativity. That was such a tiny thing, and there's nothing wrong with that in small doses. I've spoken to a lot of queer people who've really struggled with being locked down in straight spaces, basically. And so for a lot of people, suddenly they don't have the access to queer spaces that they previously had, physical queer spaces, and so queer digital spaces are suddenly much more important. Even though I was in a queer household, you know, I'd gotten used to my bougie London adult life, in which I was liberated and free and out, and I got to go to all the gay bars all the time, which I didn't have as a teenager, you know, and suddenly I was like, oh God, I don't get this anymore. And I did notice the loss, and you know, and it was compounded in with lots of other losses, of the loss of a sense of community and culture generally, but that was part of it.
100%. And speaking for myself, I was never someone who went to like LGBT spaces that frequently, but suddenly in lockdown I really had a drive to, and I hope that's something that maybe if this is ever all over, that'll be something that I can go back to and sort of like not take for granted again. And I don't even know what it is specifically that I was searching for, but I totally understand that I missed them when I didn't even go to them that often.
I'm getting a bit emotional talking about this. God, but I think they mean so much. And so and where I was looking for queer spaces, I found that a lot of them were queer online spaces, especially the ones where it was an attempt to move a physical space online very rapidly, or just kind of create one suddenly. They weren't always great. They were, you know, like, while I really appreciated sort of like queer Zoom calls and things, a queer brunch Zoom call, it's so stuttery and all of this. And so it was really nice to see something that I think wasn't just moved online, but kind of belonged online. If that makes sense.
Made for that. not like a worse version of something else that exists. Yeah.
It's really interesting to think of this as a sort of, this could only exist on the internet, not just because of niche audience, but because of all the format elements here. So it's really interesting to see a kind of a queer digital space that is born of the digital space.
That's really interesting, and that's sort of even where it separates from that other Twitch stream that I saw of the drag queens doing the Steven Universe characters, which was amazing, but I guess in a way it is kind of like, it would be better in person. Like, that's the ideal format, really. And some of them did sort of do some things they wouldn't be able to do in person, but this is something that, like you say, is from top to bottom completely, has to be online.
And I think that's really cool. I think we don't always talk about the digital kind of sphere as spatially. We talk about the digital space, but we don't talk about digital spaces that often. I mean, lots of people do talk about it in really interesting ways, but in general, I think that's not the language we always use. I actually think it is important to think of it that way for thinking about communities and community formations, and also things like community safety. I think one of the things I think is so interesting about the way that Jaremi Carey there's kind of two digital spaces here.
Yeah.
There's the digital space of the Animal Crossing island, which is a really safe one because of the whole code system, which I didn't fully understand.
There's only so much you can do, and it's for children, so there's...
Exactly. So like Animal Crossing is a clever choice of platform because there's all these safety measures in place because the game is originally designed for children. And then also you've got the additional thing of like Jaremi Carey controls the island. So Jaremi Carey has designed the island to appear sort of like Hogwarts, but a queer Hogwarts. Jaremi Carey chooses who is and isn't on the island. There's no surprises there. And then it's this very safe, kind of closed off queer space. Then you have the secondary queer space, which is the Twitch stream. And that's a lot more open. Anyone can tune in and watch, and anyone can comment. I think this is interesting because I think it is a digital space, and with the people commenting, there's something about the fact that it's so live and the fact that everybody is watching the same thing that makes it interesting, and everyone's focused on the same thing. But also there is this concern that comes with how broadened the access is. I believe that with the ballroom scene, and the physical ballroom scene, particularly at its peak in the 70s and 80s, when there were still problems with the criminalisation of homosexual acts and violence against queer people. I mean, actually, I don't know why I'm saying this. Violence against queer people is still extreme, but like it was seen a lot more casually, and police were less likely to intervene. Maybe police were less, depending on the
intervene, or if they weren't the ones causing it themselves.
Yeah, and also that, of course, yeah. So, things have changed a little bit, and I think actually some of the barriers to access were intentional, is where I'm getting at, with the ballroom scene. And they were safety precautions. The fact that you had to find out the physical location and time, which involved being in the community.
I don't know whether it was publicly advertised, but I'm assuming that not extensively.
No, it was by word of mouth. Sometimes posters, but word of mouth.
Certainly it wasn't tweeted.
Exactly. You had to physically know somebody.
Yeah.
And often, it would be somebody would approach you on the street because you look queer or whatever. But like you'd have to know somebody who'd then invite you and tell you when and where. And they were often held like illegally in warehouses that were not owned, or sometimes they were held in ballrooms. There's a range of locations, and then you had to physically go there, and and you've got to think about like once we are in, it's a relatively safe space, but getting the New York subway in full drag in 1984,
no easy feat.
And I suppose a lot of them did costume changes and things, and a lot of them just dressed like that anyways. That wasn't specific to the situation. But what I'm saying is, if you wanted to spectate, right, you had to dress the part to an extent, because if you didn't, you either wouldn't be allowed in, or you wouldn't be treated as part of the community. To spectate effectively, you had to dress the part, you had to get the clothes, get the look, like change your body, get the haircut, whatever. You had to get the invite, and then you had to get yourself there, and then you were there. You couldn't pop in for 10 seconds, right? You couldn't just click and see. But you had to plan this in advance. Kind of these barriers to access are useful in a certain way. Not, while they're problematic, they do something.
You have to have a certain level of dedication, I think.
Exactly.
Is a helpful thing for community building as well as safety and access and gatekeeping.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the community of the work involved in doing it. Whereas I think the Twitch system, it's, all you have to do is click a button and you're in.
Yeah.
And nobody can see you and you can see them. And lurk, as my teenage brother tells me the term is. You can be a lurker. You don't even have to have a Twitch account to watch, and you can see the whole conversation as well. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I think in some ways that's good because it allows more uncertainty certain or questioning
Yeah.
people to participate. It's a lot less scary and open, but there's a threat that comes with that too, the sense of it as a queer space.
Yeah. Also, I said that about a sense of community, but there is obviously with Twitch, there's more of a range of people, like you say, who would click on, and then I'm sure there's people who go to every event and maybe they recognise each other's usernames, or, I mean, I'm not a Twitch person, so maybe regulars and things like that.
No, for sure. I mean, I'm a very casual user, if you will.
Yeah.
So my entire engagement with Twitch is that I sometimes watch streams of people playing games I've already played, which are not very many, there's about 3. Because I'm, again, new to gaming, I only found it in lockdown. And I kind of have it on maybe while I'm working or cooking or something, and I sort of often watch first the playthroughs. But I was watching a playthrough and somebody was saying there was 100 people watching, and they were like, I could name every account, bar maybe 5, and they did.
Really?
So there's a really intense feeling of community,
Yeah.
I think, between a lot of streamers and their participants. So I guess maybe you could be clocked, if you will, as in a smaller community, but I would assume with something like this, especially with so many people who have only come in from one vector of, you've got the popular queers, the sort of the gamer queers with a Y, you've got the drag fans, you've got like cosplay queers, whatever, all coming in. Is there a loss of community from how easy it is to drop in and out of this?
Yeah, I think, there's different levels of community, and I can sort of imagine how this is, you could be really dedicated, but it would still only be one aspect of your life. This is purely conjecture, because I've watched Paris is Burning and watched Pose, but it seemed like it was more their whole lives than I think a lot of people make Twitch, although I'm sure there are some people whose whole life is Twitch, but you put up less to be lost, I think, with like personal safety, which is obviously a good thing.
Oh, true. That is a good point, that although there is the kind of threat, if you will, of voyeurism, there's less for them to voyeur. The people that they're observing are generally anonymous, apart from Jaremi, and that is overall good, right?
But I still think there's maybe something lost from the level of dedication, but I would say it's overall good, accessibility-wise.
Yeah, I mean, is it lost, or is it just that this is a completely different thing?
Yeah, I think probably it's a completely different thing, yeah.
In which case, because of course I think the competition of the ballroom scene was sort of half ironic, and where it wasn't ironic, because so much of the ballroom scene was a sort of a protest against the kind of peak post-war, super capitalist, super sort of yuppie culture.
Yeah, and also just like pageantry in general, that whole like competition structure. I think it's like taking that structure and making it queer. Similarly how like Animal Crossing is the structure of this ball, and then they're making that queer.
They were queering the neutral competition. Yeah. Maybe not that far, but they were queering and they were playing with kind of capitalist competition. And similarly, in some ways, it's actually lost this as the money's gone up and the stakes have gone higher. But to start with, RuPaul's Drag Race was both participating in the reality TV competitive genre and also parodying it.
100%. It was sort of like riffing off of America's Top Model, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there were, direct quotes, and, like the whole campy thing of Ru on the TV comes from Tyra.
Yeah.
And, and Ru has quoted moments from America's Next Top Model, often quite subtly. Like, she has quoted feedback that Tyra has given contestants in this, like, bizarre in-joke way.
Yeah, and even, like, structures like, thankfully it's not the terminal she-mail, but that was from, like, wasn't it Tyra Mail or something like that?
I think she did, you've got Tyra Mail, or whatever. Yeah. And there's also, a Meg Ryan, you've got mail reference.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there. But yeah, it is parody. And I guess why I was kind of bringing this up is with Jaremi Carey's ball, why does it need to be a ball? Why does it need to be competitive? Do you agree that it should have been? Do you think it would be better if it weren't competitive? Is it competitive? I mean, on a simple level, that there is a winner, yes, and there is a prize.
I think part of the power is that queer things are so seldom celebrated that having the competition, you can celebrate it, but it's not really the same to uphold this person who's done this wonderful thing that we're all enjoying. I'm not sure it would be the same without competition. I know that it's problematic in some ways, but I think it's maybe like a necessary evil. Speaking about the structure of Drag Race and this specific ball, there's got to be winners and losers. If there wasn't, then would we care? Would we tune in every week? I'm not sure. Yeah,
I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. Maybe I sound like a sort of a millennial Twitter bot written by, Jacob Rees-Mogg, but why can't we all be winners?
Yeah.
Why can't we all just have a participation trophy? No, but why can't we all just have a participation trophy and that be the end of it? I understand that for RuPaul's Drag Race, which again originates in a different time, but also is playing to a bigger audience and has to compromise more. But with something so niche as a Animal Crossing Harry Potter drag ball as hosted by Jaremi Carey on Twitch? Do we have to keep competing? And why do we compete so much? Is it because, as you say, queer people are so rarely upheld for being queer that we feel the need to do that, and the losers are maybe the martyrs to this?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's just that we're so used to competing for space that this is the most obvious model?
Yeah, I think there's merits to both those points. We love drama, and the drag world loves drama. And, if there's no conflict, there's no story in a way. And Drag Race, there's a prize of actual cash value. And this, in a way, it's a competition, but really, you're not really winning or losing much. It's just a digital made-up currency. I mean, I know all currencies are made up in a way, but this one's especially made up and doesn't really impact anything materially.
But the competition is not capitalist.
Yeah.
And I think that is interesting. Yeah. Maybe it's fantasy, but I'm like, if we can imagine, this queer, wonderful world, can't we imagine a world in which we don't need to compete in order to be interesting? You're saying if there's no conflict, there's no story. And I guess what I'm saying is, are you sure about that?
Are you saying that what would the structure be? So someone, just these people show their outfits and then we all clap?
Yeah, I guess so.
I feel like when I'm trying
isn't that kind of a drag show?
Yeah. I'm not trying to argue against you. As I'm hearing myself being defending, I realise I am sounding quite Tory, where everyone gets a participation trophy. And I'm not against that. I'm just interested to explore how that would tangibly work.
Because aren't you essentially just describing like a cabaret night? We see all their outfits and they perform, and then one at a time, and then we clap. Is that?
But then even that has a structure of it builds to the best one, who's the most established in the...
Does it? Well, you could ruffle some feathers in the queer
maybe
community.
Not. But there's still a headline act, and a competition is almost like an opportunity in a way. Whereas if a drag show is people who are already established and you're paying to see them because you know that they're good. Whereas a competition, you would go because it's people who maybe previously, this is their opportunity to become someone that you would pay to see because they're good. That is almost egalitarian in a way. Is that what I'm trying to say?
Okay, I see what you mean, but I guess what I'm saying is, why can't we have a scratch night then?
Well, because this is maybe me being mean, but if someone came up to me and was like, oh, a bunch of amateurs are going to do drag for the first time. There's 7 acts to it. I'm going to be like, I don't want to see that. I want to see some good quality stuff that I know is going to be good.
That's Tuesday at the RBT. I go all the time. Bar whatever. It's a great night.
Whereas the competition, then they're going to be measured to some amount. And the good ones will stay longer. And maybe it is sort of capitalist to me to think that the incentive to try hard will make it a better quality show.
I'm not sure of my opinion on this either. I just
I
love a
feel
fight.
It out. Yeah.
Ironically, despite my stance on this, I love a fight. And here I am fighting you about it. One of the benefits I had from watching RuPaul's Drag Race in the format of a competition show is that the competition invites assessment and comparison, which are great tools for learning. I think I learned way more about queer culture from watching RuPaul because it was a competition than I wouldn't otherwise.
And even sort of just things about fashion or makeup, I don't really have a lot of experience with, but you sort of get the tools to talk about it through comparison.
Maybe it's useful to think of the competition element of Jaremi Carey's balls as not inheritance of the kind of semi-ironic capitalist fantasy and more comparative education experience.
And the comparison as well, the decisions that the judges make, I think it's through the decisions you agree with, but also the decisions you don't agree with, that you sort of realise that you're really into drag. Some of the queens who didn't go as far as the fandom thought they would have been some of the most celebrated queens subsequently. The fan favourites like Catriona, who 2 times didn't win, even though she was so beloved. I think is even more celebrated than the ones who do win. Through comparison, you can come up with an opinion, or if you're disagreeing with it, then you're engaging with it. Whereas if you're just seeing 7 drag queens perform in a row, maybe you're not engaging as much because no one's putting them in a hierarchy.
Yeah, I think there's benefits to both. I don't know if you've ever watched Dragula.
No, I've not watched it. I've heard of it.
It's the edgy, uncomfortable goth cousin of RuPaul's Drag Race.
Spooky sister.
Spooky sister, indeed. And the Boulet brothers, whenever they judge, they preface the judging comments with this excellent bit where they say, our judgments are not a measure of you or your drag, of your drag as it relates to this competition. And I always thought that was an excellent line. I'm paraphrasing and ruining it, but it's an excellent excellent line, I think.
And 100%. And I think the problem arises not necessarily within the show. It's when fans take it outside of the show and think because someone went home first that they're not a legitimate drag queen, or that they wouldn't want to go see the show in real life, or think that something that happened in the show, means anything really. It's just a TV show for entertainment. You don't have to take it into the real world and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to boycott them because of that mean thing they said on the show, or because they did badly. That means that they're crap. You take that, what you've seen as entertainment, and now you've engaged with the characters, the real people, and then you go to the drag show and you watch them and enjoy them.
And of course, Jaremi, Carey themselves is the only judge. And I think it's quite interesting because I don't think I've ever seen a drag competition with a solo judge.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen one where unofficially there's a solo judge.
Yeah, well...
Unofficially someone holds the cards. But officially there's a diverse panel. And while that's interesting because you get the conflict within the judges, which, highlights the point we've been talking about, right? Like,
sort of the plurality of opinion.
Yeah, and about how, these judgments are subjective. And, there's different styles of drag and it's hard to compare them and everything. On the other hand, I think actually having an absolute one judge does mean that it is only Jaremi's opinion.
Yeah.
And so, there's not a group of people who all have different perspectives who've all decided to do the worst or whatever.
But then again, compared to RuPaul's Drag Race, Jeremy's ball that he's made isn't like a monolith within the culture, and the fact that he can go and create this space doesn't cost him anything really. And, be like, oh, well, this is my opinion. And then, you go see this other Twitch stream, maybe it's judged by another drag queen. Within the world of this one competition, yes, it is like one perspective, but I think the fact that this exists, in conversation with RuPaul's Drag Race and Dragula and all these other drag shows and like real life drag sort of lends itself to the fact that you are aware that it's just people's opinions at the end of the day. Or hopefully it does if you're like reading it right.
So I guess what we're saying is that what would you call it? The
cultural behemoth.
The cultural behemoth that is Jaremi Carey's Animal Crossing Potter Drag Race ball thing on Twitch. It is kind of queer spaces on queer spaces on queer spaces. It is queering a range of spaces, but it's doing it sort of not without the permission of those spaces. And it's interesting that it's it is transgressive in the sense that it moves beyond the original design, but it isn't dismantling it.
Yeah, it's still operating within it entirely, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. I have one final question for you. I believe we've got to this point. Very serious one. There were rage balls. We've only talked about the Potter one because I thought it was interesting, and also because I thought that would just be too much trouble. Jeremy's been running a range of them, and there was a Pokeball.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm sure you would have enjoyed that.
I would
probably
have
even
that
more. But
I need to check these out if it's still online.
They are. You can watch them online. Plug. Twitch. Search up the Pocket Gay, I believe is the...
Oh, really?
Yeah, the username.
I'll find it through Google anyway.
Exactly. The Pocket Gay, which I think is a Pokemon joke, actually. Because they're pocket monsters, right? I would guess.
Very clever, yes.
I haven't Googled it. I can't confirm nor deny. So, there's a Pokemon one, which of course has its own queer community.
Yeah.
In a big way. But the last one, which I think was about a month ago, that I know about, was themed on food. So there's quite a diverse range of themes, right? So my question is, if you were to enter one of Jaremi's pageants, what would your dream theme be?
Oh my God, I don't know if this is a cheat to say because I've mentioned it already, but Steven Universe would be a great one. Yeah, combining my nerdy side with the queer side, really lovely. I've been rewatching Avatar over lockdown, and there's a lot of great costumes in that. I really want to see that dragged up. That would be ideal for me. What about you?
I would like to say something like John Waters, because it's this huge queer moment that I love so much and has done so much for the community and means so much. But actually, that's way too much pressure. So my answer is Totally Spies.
I used to love that one,
Because I had some feelings about Totally Spies as a child that I really want to work through. And I'm now announcing this to the entire internet. Call me.
But do you think Totally Spies was Powerpuff Girls in another format?
No, because Totally Spies was fetish porn.
Let's leave it there. I don't need an explanation.
No, there's the whole thing about it. It was like made by some fetish porn company or something. I can't remember the details, but the makers of Totally Spies overlapped or were fetish makers, and it was originally French and it was more explicit. And when you watch it, there's all this like stuff, like there's a lot of shots of their feet crushing things.
Like a Tarantino film.
It's like a Tarantino film. Actually, you know what? No. I take it back. My answer, I would like to go to a Tarantino ball. I want to steal Tarantino from Tarantino. I want to annoy all the boys.
That's quite taking quite a masculine sphere and queering it. So who would you go as? Oh, I'm gonna choose mine first. Uma Thurman. In the yellow
Again, haven't thought this far ahead.
If not Lucy Liu.
I would like good answers. I mean, great answers. I think I would actually be tempted to go as John Travolta in Pulp Fiction.
Oh yeah, that's a good choice.
Or you know, I would be Bruce Willis with my pot belly.
That'd be good. Oh my, I could be Uma Thurman with the needle stuck in me.
Oh my
we
God.
should do this now.
Oh my God, we should do a drag out. I'll be John.
We're halfway there.
I've actually no. I know. I would do Grease because secretly in my bedroom I pretend to be Danny Zuko, and I was saying earlier, but I do actually do some drag, but I'm limited by the shape of my body. If I could just morph my body, my ultimate choice for drag I would just want to be Danny Zuko in the skin tight black t-shirt over the rippling ab. I could just buy a bodysuit, but
that's amazing. I want to see it.
I would want to be 6'4". I want to have the rippling abs under the skin tight t-shirt with the arms. I want to thrust and gyrate my hips to Summer Lovin', and that would be my dream. I would do a Grease week.
And speaking of John Travolta and drag, I just want to say that I think Hairspray is his greatest role.
I mean, you're not wrong. It's many people's greatest role. It's everybody who was in its greatest role.
It's the greatest thing I've ever seen.
In general. Amanda Bynes could never.
Oh my gosh.
On that note, I think we'll call it time. Thank you for coming along and speaking to me.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, I've learned some interesting things. You've changed
me
my
too.
mind.
You've given me a lot to chew on as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look up this Lady Voldemort Florida Man situation.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a lot of links, I think.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to send you some links.
Yeah.
See, look at us creating queer digital space. See? Perfect. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this month's Queer Disrupt podcast. For more podcasts, check out our Spotify, Spreaker and Apple Music account. We also have a YouTube account at Queer Disrupt, so please like and subscribe there. We have Twitter and Facebook, both at Queer Disrupt, so please give us a follow. And finally, our website is queerdisrupt.com, where you can stay up to date on all of our upcoming events and see what else we have to offer. Thanks again, and catch you next time.